And now our first keynote speaker. Please welcome, live from Melbourne, Mr. Sahil Merchant. Sahil is both an entrepreneur and advisor to senior executives in large organizations. He is currently a partner at McKinsey & Company and founded McKinsey's digital and data practice in Australia. He advises large organizations on digital and customer strategy and the ways in which they can create the environment to execute at speed and with agility. In 2021, Sahil would be returning to his entrepreneurial roots to start a new advisory firm focused on people, culture, and leadership in the increasingly complex digital age. He has in the past founded a number of organizations, including but not limited to a physical retail brand, a consulting firm, and a medical services company. Sahil served on the board of Zeus Victoria from April 2013 to April 2017. We now welcome Mr. Merchant with his presentation. What does it take to lead organizations in an increasingly complex environment?
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear and see me well. I'm sure someone will give me a sign if there's any problems. Whatever time it is around the world for you, I hope you're nicely settled in and comfortable. I noticed someone even joining us from New Zealand. So kudos to you, given the time of morning it is there right now. I've been asked to speak for around 45 minutes. We have then 15 minutes afterwards for Q&A, but let's see how we're going for time. It is unfortunately a little difficult to run a truly interactive session with this many people on Zoom, but please do think of questions for the end and we'll see how we go. Now, before we jump into the topic of leadership in a complex world, which is hopefully a bit of a different topic to what you might normally cover at a WAZA conference, I want to say two things. First of all, I want to thank you very, very much for having me. And secondly, I want to congratulate you and thank you for all the work that you do. Now, I have zero background in the veterinary or environmental sciences. I have zero background in conservation, large attraction management, and nor do I know that much about tourism or philanthropy. However, I was privileged, as we mentioned before, to serve on the board of Zeus Victoria in Australia for 4 years. And during that time, I learned just how critical a role zoos and aquariums play in animal conservation, animal welfare, environmental advocacy, and community education. Moreover, I know how organizations such as yours are filled to the brim with passionate people who genuinely care and want to make a difference. So thank you for the amazing work you do and for the role that you play as leaders. Now, with that said, unfortunately, it's not going to be enough. But the world doesn't need you to do more, inverted commas. The world is going to need you to do different. Now, by way of personal introduction, and by the way, thank you for that. You've heard I'm a partner in a management consulting firm. And you've also heard that, to be transparent, I'm not going to be there much longer. I'm going to head back into the familiar waters of entrepreneurship. Yes, at McKinsey, I'm known for having founded and led our digital and data practices. But let me be clear, I'm not really a technical guy. I can't fix your computer. And I unashamedly rely on my 3 teenage kids to help me navigate a world of technology that is changing faster than I can keep track of. I've lived and worked in Spain, France, Switzerland, and the UK. And now here's a truly unusual thing to say when you're introducing yourself, but I'm going to say it. I will readily admit that I'm a hypocrite. Okay? I'm a hypocrite because I'm going to be advocating today for a different type of leadership when I myself am only partially able to meet the leadership bar that we're going to be talking about today. So before we talk about what it takes to lead organizations through complexity, let's just take stock around what has changed. Has anyone noticed that the world feels just a little different to what it did at the start of the year? Work from home, lack of global movement, face masks, macroeconomic carnage, and a health crisis on an international scale. Add to that political polarization, social polarization, and geopolitical tensions, and the world in 2020 obviously feels like a very different place. However, I really hope that the radical changes that we've seen over the last 6 months don't drown out the changes from the last 1 to 2 decades, where we have seen the most fundamental shift in the business environment since the industrial age. And strangely, this shift rarely, if ever, gets spoken about. No, it's not the advent of digital, nor the internet. It's not about social media, nor the proliferation of data, mobile phones, or even preferences of, and expectations of customers. All these things serve as the backdrop to the biggest changes businesses ever faced. So here is what has changed. The fundamental nature of the problems that businesses now face is different to before. And let me emphasize that again. It is the nature of the problems that has changed. Now, I'm going to do something risky and try to share my screen, and let's hope that this all works fine. And I'm going to introduce a framework, and I promise I will try to go light on the academic frameworks, but I must admit that I find this one very helpful when trying to make sense of why leadership is so much harder now than ever before. And I promise you I will tie this back to the leadership challenge you all face today. So let me see if I can just share my screen. And I'm sure one of the organizers will let me know if this is not showing up well. Someone give me a thumbs up. Yep, good, okay, fantastic. Okay, so this is called the Cynefin framework. It was authored by a guy named David Snowden. Cynefin is a Welsh word with no direct English translation, but it roughly means the place where one inhabits. And if there are any Welsh speakers in the audience who want to correct me, please go ahead and feel free. Now, if we take a bit of a walk back in history to the emergence of the industrial age, this is where modern organizations really started to take shape. And we often think about factories when we think about the industrial age. And the type of problems that factories helped us solve were how to do tasks more efficiently, at larger scale and at cheaper cost. We were solving for what's called as known variables. And with the help of technology, we were able to derive new best practices. This is the world of simple problems, the bottom right-hand quadrant. This is the world of known knowns, where the relationship between cause and effect is obvious. This is the realm of the standard operating procedure, the realm of double entry accounting and loan payment processing. But of course, not everything is a simple problem. In many situations, there is a complicated relationship between cause and effect, which requires analysis or the application of expertise. Now, this is the world of known unknowns, where folks like me, consultants, and other experts come into their own. In this world, apparently, intellectual smarts win the day. There is not just one answer, but there is good practice informed by experience and knowledge. Engineers, MBA graduates, and most of our corporate leaders, and even many surgeons, have grown up in this world. We have applied relevant expertise to solve many large and complicated business conundrums, such as where to drill for oil, how to optimize production in a plant or factory with multiple variables, how to maximize revenue through pricing strategy, or how to minimize bad debts. When it comes to complicated problems, one source of leadership comes down to experience, knowledge, and the pattern recognition to make good and timely decisions. Now, there's no inherent better or worse here. Complicated has been the world that I and most of my colleagues have felt most comfortable in. It's the world most of us know well. In this world, we have set up linear organization structures based on tree diagrams. We have departments, business units, clear reporting lines, and set in stone targets and accountabilities. And if you draw this on a piece of paper, an organization looks very linear, ordered, and rational with clear pathways for information flows and decision making. We have set up our organizations to reflect the right-hand side of this page. And our leadership styles have developed to reward those who thrive in this environment. The challenge that we now face, however, is that much of the world and the challenges of today are moving toward the left-hand side of this page. And the title of my presentation is How to Lead in Complex Times. Complex problems, the upper left quadrant, are very different to complicated ones. A Ferrari is complicated. But with the right expertise, you can take a Ferrari apart and put it back together again. I mean, after all, a Ferrari is mainly the sum of its parts. But David Snowden, the author of this framework, in the Harvard Business Review, uses the Amazon rainforest as an example of complex. It's in constant flux. It's more than the flora and fauna or the sum of its component parts. but it's also impacted by weather, global warming, politics, and policies. And here's the important bit. It is impacted in ways that are not readily predictable. Intellectual smarts or a bunch of experts in a conference room can't just build an algorithm or apply well-tested practice. So this is increasingly our current context. There are many unknown unknowns, and the relationship between cause and effect can only be perceived in retrospect. As such, we are dealing with emergent practice. Our response to the coronavirus is an example of a complex problem environment. Suddenly, past knowledge and expertise is not so relevant. As a leader, I no longer get my source of authority from having seen this movie more times than you. My smarts will no longer win the day. But what does this mean for leaders who have been mostly schooled in the world of complicated? Well, it means that my effectiveness is more dependent on empowering teams and allowing them a safe environment to test, fail, learn, and improve. It means I need to spend more time on vision and purpose and seeing big picture connections well beyond just my narrow patch, my organization, my industry, my country. It means that the definition of my stakeholders blows out due to interconnectivity, and that I have to embrace the inevitable of not being able to please them all equally. It means that if we as leaders could apply our intellect to ferret out the answers, then we are not asking the right questions. It means redefining risk and seeing the absence of risk as being the biggest alarm bell of all. And it means shedding the protection of knowledge, expertise, and much of the good stuff that made me successful and got me to where I am today. Now, there is a well-known author by the name of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Maybe many of you have heard of him. He wrote the book, The Black Swan. He also talks about another really interesting concept. Now, I'm going to change slides. Hopefully you can see this. There's an axis there. In this slide, you can see these two axes. The vertical is performance, while the horizontal is pressure. And the more pressure, or you could use pressure as a proxy for stress or change that exists in a system, the worse performance tends to be. And the curve that you now see might be a depiction of what I just said. The more pressure and performance goes down. Taleb called this fragility or fragile. Now, for the native English speakers, I normally ask, if I'm doing this in a live situation, what is the opposite of the word fragile in English? And normally folks yell them out. I get words such as strong, resilient, unbreakable. The problem with these words is that they're not really the opposite of fragile. If I was to plot strong, resilient, or unbreakable onto this chart, I would get performance that looks like this. Pressure increases and performance doesn't vary. It stays strong and resilient. Now, the opposite of fragile would look more like this. Okay? And in English, there is no real word for this type of performance. Hence, Taleb called it anti-fragile. Imagine institutions that were architected so that the more complex the world, the more volatile, the more pressure in the system, the better they performed. The first line, the fragile one, can be thought of a bit like a machine. Pressure causes it to break. Now, of course, some of you will have biology backgrounds and I don't, but I've been told the flip side to this, the top line, looks like some organisms. Introduce pressure, a foreign body or disease, and some organisms build immunity or adapt and get stronger. Google was set up to operate as an organism. Most digital companies have this as part of their DNA. It was why Facebook was able to completely change strategy and pretty much stop all work on their platform for desktop computers and switch to a focus of mobile within a week of Zuckerberg deciding that mobile was the future. In the world of technology, that is like saying that a bank is going to become a supermarket or a construction company is going to move into health. Companies who are set up to be anti-fragile actually welcome volatility and uncertainty. For them, it is a competitive advantage. compared to fragile or at best strong and resilient competitors. Let me see, let me stop sharing my screen now. Hang on. Okay, hopefully you can see me again. But why are more of the problems of today shifting towards complex? The reason for this is interconnectivity. Complex problems tend to have greater interconnectivity. Connecting humans and more recently machines in ways that were unfathomable at the birth of the industrial age has changed the nature of the problems we now face. The words network and ecosystem are much more prevalent. Our organizations need to solve problems in different ways. And that means they need to change. And if they don't, well, change will just happen around them. We got the Arab Spring. We got a complete restructuring of the music and video industries. We got a foreign power allegedly interfering in the last US election. We got an online bookseller becoming the world's largest cloud computing provider. We have a few relatively new young organizations holding a scary amount of our personal data. We have global mobility spreading a worldwide pandemic, which in turn has shut down global mobility. Change at speed is our new normal. Now, I could spend ages talking about organization change, but that perhaps is a topic for another day. Other than to say that the construction of the organization as a well-oiled machine is suited for the top-down world or the world of complicated. Top-down hierarchies where information flows slowly crawl up from the front line to senior management for their almighty pronunciation. Well, this is no longer effective if you want to be fast, flexible, and responsive. Many academics have spoken to the idea of the modern organization as more of an organism, made up of small cells that can form and disband and deploy when and where needed. And if any of you have kept up with the large corporate trend of enterprise agility, which is particularly prevalent in Northern Europe and also in Australia and New Zealand, and I'm talking about agile, not in the sense of software development, but of organization redesign, then you will have seen the organization as an organism in practice. But instead of delving too deeply into organization change, I want to ask a question about change more broadly. How many large corporate change efforts do you think are successful? The answer is around 25%. In other words, 3 out of 4 change efforts fail to meaningfully move the needle. Let's just reflect on that for a moment. The world has been changing faster than ever before. COVID has only accelerated this, as I'm sure many of you are feeling in the context of your own organizations. And in response to these changes, we look to transform. However, the concept of transformation has almost become a dirty word. Digital transformations, customer transformations, data transformations, cultural transformations, agile transformations, everyone is embarking on a transformation. And yet, only 1 in 4 in any way actually move the needle. What is worse is that most senior executives know these stats beforehand. Maybe they just think that they are going to be different. And of course, lots of experts supposedly have the secret recipe to transformation success. There are checklists, golden rules, recipes, and formulas. But here is my take. Transformation or change efforts, more broadly, most often fail because of you. All of you. The best consultants, internal project officers, transformation approaches, none of these will make a difference. You are the problem. And so am I. So perhaps I should say, we are the problem. And before we talk about why, let me just make one further observation. How much time in your organization do you spend thinking about or talking about strategy? Both boards and senior management teams have a strategy cycle, and it predictably takes up significant time and effort. The thing that amuses me about strategy is how often our strategic efforts are completely devoid of realism. Now, let me see if I can share my screen again. Let me just do that. Share, and hopefully you can see you can see the slide here. How many of you recognize this picture? How often do you see a leadership team forecasting that they're actually going to deliver a year-on-year decline? Very rarely, right? We constantly think things are going to get better. We ignore the fact that most organizations have never previously delivered a successful reinvention or delivered breakout performance, because this year, with this strategy and this leadership team and my brilliance, things are going to be different, right? What is even more baffling is that many corporate players forecast this performance in the context of a competitive environment. It might be gain in market share, customer acquisition numbers, churn rates. Large corporates come up with plans and execute initiatives to beat the market. The problem is, of course, that competitors are doing exactly the same thing. Yet when we come up with our plans, we don't transport ourselves into the boardrooms of our competitors and think, gee, they are likely to be making similar moves. We don't own up and say, those folks across the street are probably as smart as we are, and anything we can think of, they can think of. We just assume we have the answers and others don't. And the results are on your screen. Hopefully I'll stop sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see me again. So if strategy is not often a differentiator, what else could we focus on? So how much time do institutions spend thinking about their leadership capabilities? Do CEOs of large organizations question whether their individual and collective leadership effectiveness is a competitive advantage or disadvantage? Given the CEO sets the tone, that would be like looking in the mirror and questioning their own competency. And how would they know if their organization has strong leadership effectiveness? This is not simply about talent. Talent and leadership are very different things. Talent is most often measured functionally. I'm a good marketer. I'm efficient at financial control. I come up with good operational solutions. Of course, we do also think about softer skills or EQ in talent management. But leadership is so much more than just good EQ and knowing stuff. We'll unpack this a little more in a few minutes. But any focus on effective leadership will only, of course, be important if leadership actually matters. Well, I'm pleased to say that research in the last decade has shown a clear, strong, positive correlation between leadership effectiveness and business performance. Hopefully no one is super surprised by this. However, a particular research study from 2009 looked over a database of 250,000 surveys and found something quite extraordinary. Leaders who were rated on a good 360-degree competency assessment at or above the 80th percentile produced twice the result of those in the middle 60 percentile range. So leadership effectiveness is not driving merely incremental benefits. It can be a massive game changer. And so when we look to adapt in wildly changing times, transform our business and reinvent, why is it that we spend all our time on strategy and execution and so little time looking at ourselves? Given the clear relationship between leadership effectiveness and business performance, how much time do you spend really interrogating the leadership effectiveness of your organization? Do you have a common language for it? What are the markers? And even if you have markers, are they well adapted for the world of complex problems in addition to complicated problems? Of course, then there is the challenge of measurement. How do you measure if someone is good at relationships? How do you measure if someone is inspirational, visionary, or has integrity? How do you measure courage? How do you measure systems awareness and leadership across integrated networks? And finally, how do you observe individual leadership, but then aggregate that across a leadership team to determine whether that is translating to collective leadership effectiveness? If we are not facing into these questions, then we are ignoring a huge driver of effectiveness in favor of strategy and operational metrics, which rarely lead to breakout performance. Now, what do I mean by breakout performance? Breakout performance is doubling visitor numbers. It is growing online engagement by an order of magnitude 3 years running. It's deciding to create an entirely new product line and having that worth more than your entire core business. It is reinvention, metamorphosis. It is the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. And sadly, it is reserved for a lucky few sweetheart stories. This type of stuff just doesn't happen to everyday people and everyday organizations, right? But why not? Well, as humans, we are incredibly poor at predicting the unknown future. We define our expectations based on past experience. And if we are rooted in the past and what we know, then our evolution is incremental at best. It also means that we are prone to believing that what got us here today will be helpful for tomorrow. If we want massive change for our organizations, then we need to change. But the caterpillar can't fly without giving away their past self. Of course, most of us think we are pretty much okay the way we are. And there's nothing wrong with this. We're all just fine. But if we want to respond to massive change and reinvent as organizations, then we need to evolve as leaders. And this is not incremental. We need to change our fundamental operating system. And now here's the risky part of what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to show a video. As an introduction to this, I want to show this video. It's a short 3-minute video, and then we can deep dive into this a little bit more. Let's see if I can get this working with sound as well. Hang on a sec. I don't know if that, no, let me do that again. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you can, hang on, here we go. That's better. Can you see that? No. That's not working very well, is it? It was working beautifully in the prep session. Let me try one more time. I can send you the link, yes, but I actually have a backup version of it. So let me see if I can share it in a different way. Because it is a good video if I can get it working for you.
Location, location, location. Brought to you by the Conscious Leadership Group. Find them on the web at www.conscious.is. Animation by Graham Franks. www.grahamfranks.com. One question that conscious leaders ask themselves over and over is, where am I? To support leaders in locating themselves as they ask the question, where am I? We offer this tool. A line. A simple black line. At any moment, all leaders and all people are either above the line or below the line. Our location describes how we're being with what is occurring in our life right now. If we're above the line, we are open, curious, and committed to learning. If we are below the line, we are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. Stop right now and simply ask yourself, where am I? In this now moment, am I above the line or below the line? Typically, when people are below the line, they believe certain things about the world. For example, they believe there is not enough. It could be that there's not enough money, or time, or space, or energy, or love. People below the line also believe that their story about the situation is right. People below the line also believe that there is a threat out there. Something or someone is threatening their desire for approval, control, or security. And people below the line see the situation as serious. The deeper below the line they are, the more serious things look. People below the line tend to behave certain ways as well. They tend to cling to an opinion, find fault and blame, gossip, explain, rationalize and justify, get overwhelmed, and avoid conflict or pursue conflict for the sake of winning. When people are above the line, they believe that learning and growing are more important than being right. They believe that all people and circumstances are their allies, here for their growth. They believe that from a distance, almost everything is funny. People above the line live in curiosity, listen deeply, speak unarguably, question all their beliefs, and live a life of play. Now, Knowing what you know about being above or below the line, where are you? One thing to know as you consider this question: we are hardwired to go below the line. Literally, our brain is programmed to perceive threat, and when it does, a chemical cocktail courses through our veins, and we go below the line. This reaction was designed to help us survive in the presence of a real threat to our physical survival. An issue for modern-day leaders is that often our brains can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our ego or identity. We react and get defensive when we experience a threat to our ego. So in many ways, being below the line is natural and normal. But when we are below the line, we're not in a state, literally brain state, of high creativity, collaboration, innovation, and relational connection. We're simply trying to survive. Leaders today can't thrive if they're in survival mode. So the first activity of conscious leadership is location, location, location. In this now moment, where am I? Telling ourselves and others the truth about our current location begins the great conversation.
Okay.
Are you working from presence
let me stop
or
that now.
the drama triangle? Brought to you by the Conscious Leadership Group. Find them on...
Okay, hopefully you were all able to see that video and the sound and everything worked fine. I didn't get any messages on my WhatsApp that it was not working, so hopefully that was all fine. Okay, so I like that video a lot, but it talks about moving above the line and below the line as if it was simply a matter of choice. And at times it is. However, we as humans tend to have a default mode, right? In the academic literature, in academic leadership literature particularly, it is sometimes referred to as being in the creative versus being in the reactive. Now, this is the part where I have been getting it wrong. Being aware of the line and my personal ego that drives me below the line, I thought it was all a matter of conscious choice. I simply need to, I guess, choose to go above the line, and I will be more creative, playful, and ultimately a better leader. This hasn't been working out very well for me. When I'm sitting in a meeting room with plenty of other egos, competing interests, and complex problems that by definition involve dealing with polarities, no one plays that cool video and reminds us all to go above the line. I started to think I was failing, or perhaps I was just a crappy leader. Then I started to realize something. I got better at maths by studying it and practicing it. The same with playing the guitar. The same with reading the mood in the room. The same with knowing whether data science or data visualization or cloud engineering was really the issue. But how much time had I really spent thinking about leadership, interrogating it in the way I did with those other things in order to build some level of mastery? How much have I experimented with leadership? I sort of have my style that I think works for me and I deploy it. So maybe I needed to lighten up a little bit and not be so hard on myself. Perhaps I am an average leader because I haven't spent any real time in deep contemplation of what it means to be a leader. Now, sure, I've been on plenty of leadership courses and I read a book or two, as many of us do. And I get feedback from direct reports and even perhaps a board of directors. But this tells me about the job I am doing or gives me tools to communicate better or listen more deeply. These are important, yes, but these courses don't provoke me to question my operating system. If I am the caterpillar, I can maybe get a little fatter or faster or stronger. But what am I doing for myself as a leader that will provoke me to spin a cocoon and disintegrate into a goo-like substance, giving away my old self to emerge as a butterfly? Most of us are unwilling to do this. We are just fine the way we are. But then, yes, most of us will only ever see or oversee small incremental change at best. When it comes to driving lasting change, there are lots of things that need to come together to shock us away from the status quo. How many people have been on diets and lost weight only for their bodies to return to their previous state over time? Lasting change is not so easy. It needs a holistic approach. For organizations, it needs, and it sometimes helps to see lasting change through the lens of 4 quadrants. And let me see if I can share my screen again and just show you another slide. Let's see if we can get that up and share. No, don't want. And I will share that now. Share screen. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So I was talking about looking at change through the lens of 4 quadrants. Now in this 2x2, you have individual and collective on the vertical axes, and you have internal and external on the horizontal axes. Most of our leadership efforts focus on the right-hand side of this diagram. Okay, so hopefully you can see that now. Sorry, there was a problem before. So you got internal and external on the horizontal, and your individual and collective on the vertical. Okay, most of our leadership efforts focus on the right-hand side of this diagram. Okay? Just like the chest and the arms tend to get more of a scrub in the shower than under the feet, we focus on the visible and the easily accessible. More enlightened leaders, of course, also realize that culture is critical. So we do surveys, run focus groups, get information about our cultures, and then plot the course to improve them. Yet culture is ultimately made up of people. The people in your organizations take their cues from you and your leadership teams. How is culture going to change if you don't change? I said earlier that you and me, we are the problem when it comes to change. But how much time do we spend thinking about quadrant number 1? Most of us simply don't have the luxury of time to sit and navel gaze, contemplate life, love, and the universe. We're busy executives, administrators, family members. Time is the one thing we never have enough of. And yet here is the irony. I'm convinced that the greatest leaders are those that have evolved to a different operating model by taking the time to step away from the need to be or seem to be productive. They routinely act above the line or out of the creative as a default, not because they choose to from moment to moment, but because they have consciously evolved from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And it's no coincidence that most of the really great leaders I've met, who are truly inspiring in a way that integrates across polarities and solves complex rather than only complicated problems, all tend to have life experience on their side. Because the push to jettison your old self and reinvent is often catalyzed by crisis, tragedy, or some other systemic shock. In the absence of this, there is little motivation to question the assumptions that we actually don't even realize we hold tightly to, the assumptions that make up our invisible operating system. I said at the very outset of my talk that I'm a hypocrite. I don't routinely act out of the creative mind. However, the progress I've made is that at the very least I've spun my cocoon. I hope to be able to fly one day. Now in my case, the catalyst was a shock to the system. Let me share my screen again. Okay, hopefully again you can see that. This is me in February 2017 in Fiji. At this McKinsey work retreat, we had a big party where our quite talented rock band was playing a gig and entertaining all our staff. Now, in one of my past lives, I was actually a classically trained tenor. So I also used to double up as the band's lead singer. We were rocking away and I was really into it, singing my lungs out and headbanging, so literally headbanging like I was a 21-year-old, when suddenly I felt a tweak in the back of my neck. Now, I thought I might have pulled a muscle, but I kept singing, and at the end of the song, just sort of massaged out this creak in my neck before continuing on and finishing the gig. After the concert, when I wanted to be enjoying the afterglow of being a rock star, I started feeling a bit unwell. Then my leg went numb. Then one side of my face went numb. Now, I won't go through all the details of that night and the challenges for a foreigner having a medical emergency in that part of the world. But long story short, I had torn the vertebral artery in the back of my neck by head banging, literally head banging. Okay. And the vertebral artery is the artery that leads to the brain. And that caused blood to stagnate in one area rather than flow smoothly. And when, of course, blood stagnates, it tends to form clots. And one of those blood clots decided it will be a good idea to lodge itself in my brain, causing me to have a substantial stroke. This was February 2017. I was eventually medically evacuated back to Australia, where I then had another stroke before the doctors could figure out what was going on. The good news is that I was incredibly lucky. I could have died or had significant permanent damage, but there are obviously parts of my brain that were not very impressive, and the clots were wonderfully kind and chose those specific areas. 6 months of rehab and 2 years of a funny head from time to time, and I was back to normal. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. But I said back to normal, I actually wasn't. That was my catalyst to start questioning my life. Of course, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. For many, it's the losing of a parent, facing up to some sort of mortality. For some, it is simply midlife. For others, it's a change of career. It doesn't have to be any one thing. Yet normally we do need a push to take a deep look inside and try to evolve what we find there. And what I found confused me. I couldn't really put it into words. I felt like I was in the movie The Matrix, like I knew that there was something wrong, but I couldn't wake up from the dream that was clouding me from seeing the truth. And I knew that I was only a fraction of the leader I wanted to be. Sure, I'd done some good things. I'd built a consulting practice. A few folks said they found me inspiring, that I'd made a difference. I'd founded a few businesses, but I hadn't really changed the system. I hadn't left a meaningful footprint. I was mired in the incremental, trying to make improvements via a fundamentally limited operating system. My old Nokia mobile phone from the year 2001 was smaller and had more functionality than my 1999 version, but there was no way known that Nokia could act as a personal computing device and help me coordinate my life as my 2020 iPhone does. Mobile phones needed a step change evolution to break free from the limitations of their operating system, and so did I. So I started trying out all sorts of weird new stuff. I started meditating and doing yoga. I started to take an interest in the leadership literature, the brain, neuroscience, spirituality, none of which I yet know that much about. And I opened up to different influences. This is going to be quite a controversial thing to say, and it's deeply personal, if I can get more personal than telling a bunch of strangers I had a couple of strokes. But I went from unquestionably believing in God to allowing my teenage son to influence me towards being an atheist. Strangely, however, in parallel, I became more determined than ever to make a difference in the lives of others than to chase success for myself. And recently, I got introduced to the thinking of an American psychologist by the name of Robert Keegan. And suddenly things started to fall into place for me. I realized why I wasn't fulfilling my leadership potential. Now, Keegan talks about humans going through various stages of development. And let me make it clear, I am not a psychologist, and I'm but a mere student of this stuff, and then only recently so. I wouldn't be surprised if many of you listening today know more about Keegan than I do. That said, Keegan talks about various stages of consciousness. And the first that captured my interest was the transition from being a teenager to becoming an adult. Now, teenagers are all about satisfying their needs and wants. They are not sufficiently separate from their needs to manage them. In fact, the needs manage the teenager. This means that the needs of others are less likely to feature prominently. For the average teenager, needs and the concept of self are the same thing. And if any of you have teens like I do, then maybe this resonates. But as we mature into adulthood, we learn to separate ourselves from our needs. We reluctantly give up our self-absorption and realize that we have to get along if we are to progress in this world. So we learn to be aware of others' needs. We socialize into the expectations of what the collective wants from us. Career, family, responsibility, success. In this stage of development, the self is made up of how others see us. We might be smart, driven, caring, bold, a family man, a mother. The common thread here is that the way others see us is what is. We become that thing. It becomes our self, and our sense of identity derives from social context. And this is where I have been, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Experts estimate that 75% of adults live in this stage of development. It dominates adulthood. I have derived my sense of self and all the self-worth that accompanies it by what others think of me. I'm a partner at a top-flight consulting firm. I'm smart. I have a big house. My kids are good at sport and successful at school. I'm a good father. And then when it comes to work environment, I get stuff done. I make the tough calls. I deliver results. Whatever it might be or what I think about myself, I am what I perceive others to think about me. That is who Sahil is, what others think about me. And so what does that mean for me as a leader? It means that I lead from a place of reactivity. This regularly puts me below that line we saw in that video. I define myself from the outside in, and my self-worth is completely dependent on external validation. The kicker here is that most external validation is rooted in the status quo. There is a way things get done, and we value and reward that. If I want to react to really complex times and complex problems and navigate uncharted territory that we're all facing today, it's going to be super hard to do this if my operating system unwittingly forces me to follow the accepted path, because that's where in the past I've gained approval. If this is where I get my sense of self. So what is the next operating system? Keegan estimates that only 20 to 25% of adults ever actually make the transition to the self-authoring stage, or make the move from the reactive to the creative. It requires leaders to shed their old sense of self where outside expectations and my ability to live up to them is what defines me. Leaders in the creative frame of mind, once there, are free from the binds of external expectations and are able to ask, what do I really want? What do I really care about? What is the vision that gets me out of bed? And this is the cocoon that I'm currently nestled within. As I mentioned, I've just recently quit my job. I'm leaving behind prestige and safety to embark into a new venture just when security is more highly valued than ever before. But this, I feel, is my calling. I saw it in a positive sense when running startups, the ability for a team of motivated individuals to park egos and work together to change the world. And I saw it in the negative when trying to help large corporates through digital, data, and agile transformations. As good or bad as a consultant as I may or may not have been, no amount of help was going to transform those organizations and allow them to truly enjoy the benefits of a digital age. We were working on the external, but no one was working with their leaders on their internal operating system. Now, I strongly believe that the world faces a time of both crisis and opportunity like never before. We need leaders who can transcend complicated problems and reinvent organizations in the face of the complex world of today, that line. This will need was sufficiently free from the binds of outside expectations to become evident for me. If any of you were to talk to me about digital and how to make use of the wonders that we have available to us today, I wouldn't start off by looking at your technology, your IT department, your platform ecosystem, or even your strategy. Based on what I've seen over the last 10 years, I would start by looking at you. Can you adapt fast enough to make the most of complex over complicated? How are you going to react when your board asks for the detailed business plan with 3 years worth of monthly cash flows to justify the spend? How are you going to sleep at night when ceding control to the front line for them to work out the next 3 steps forward, rather than having it outlined in a nice PowerPoint doc that, if we are honest, we all know is actual rubbish? And how will you react when they inevitably stuff it up and are forced to retreat and push forward in a different direction? Are you willing to change, really change? Not just do a training course and learn some sexy new terms. I want to know that you are going to spend as much time working on your inner game as your outer game. That you are going to work to evolve your operating system to a higher level of consciousness, and recognize that in doing so, you're actually doing your life's work. This is what it's going to take to lead in today's complex world. A set of leaders who are self-authored and who drive for step change in the face of great complexity, rather than incremental improvements to my old Nokia phone. If we listen to the academics, most of us supposedly will never get there. But I hope this is going to be my life's work. If I can help just one other person on this journey, in addition to getting there myself, the world is straight away a better place. So I'm currently in my own cocoon. I don't yet know what it feels like to be a butterfly, but I'm now committed. Once I start to metamorphosize, there's really no turning back. And I personally cannot wait to hopefully one day fly. We need leaders who also aspire to fly. And that will only come by looking inside as much as outside, by giving up our old selves, where how you are perceived is what you are. There's no silver bullet here, just a hope that the absence of sufficient step change leadership, which is needed in today's complex world more than ever before, will trigger more leaders to start the dialogue and start their journey to their own higher operating system. Thank you so much for having me speak to you. I hope that even with all the pressures of crises all around you with COVID, some of you will take something small from this presentation, even if nothing more than a spark for future dialogue. I appreciate you giving me your attention. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for all the work you do. And I wish you all the luck in the world as you look to transform your organizations in the face of complex change. Please, if you have questions, I'm happy to open it up. And Martin and the WAZA team, please feel free to throw any questions or any particular comments that you feel might be worth opening up to.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sahil Merchant, for this insightful presentations. As you said, we now open the floor for questions. So please enter your questions on the chat. The team of WAZA office will start receiving them shortly. And you can either write them on the open chat or send them privately to the WAZA team.
I can't promise I'm going to be able to answer the questions, of course, but I'll do my best.
We have the first question. Today, we're seeing diverse types of leadership, and as leaders, how can we avoid this polarization, or is it actually something needed?
So I'm a big believer in diversity of leadership, right? I think we absolutely need those different voices. What I think, though, is that you can have different perspectives and different points of view, but if you are leading from above the line, then it's a healthy dialogue. Right? If you're leading from a place of creativity, it's beyond you as an individual, and you're looking to solve complex problems. Complex problems, by definition, are going to have differences of opinion. That dialogue, for me, is super healthy. The problem I see with leadership, and you know, I'm not going to make this political in any way, but a lot of the political issues that we have is not because of differences of opinion, but it's because leaders are much more around self-absorption and working from either the reactive mindset or sometimes even that teenage not being able to separate themselves from their own needs. So I'm all for diversity of opinion, radically different opinion, no problem at all, right? But I really want it to be coming from the right place of above the line rather than below the line.
Thank you. And the next question is, Taking the evolution analogy, how can we work together as a global community to ensure all organizations, no matter size, nationality, to evolve and aren't made extinct during change?
Yeah. So the first thing I would ask is that we actually start having the dialogue about it, right? In our organizations, we just don't very often talk about leadership and what it means to be effective leaders. Right? How many organizations actually start to measure reactive mindsets versus creative mindsets? Right? It's a very difficult thing to do, but increasingly there are people out there that actually make careers out of this, and there are other organizations that do this quite well. What I would love to see is a dialogue both at the individual organization level, but then also at the industry level, starting to have the conversations, what does effective leadership mean for us in our industry? And as I said, it's more than talent, right? So it's more than great listening and vision. There's a whole bunch of things around creative thinking, around authenticity, or systems awareness, or courage. And to me, that dialogue is the critical part. That's what I was hoping to do with today's conversation, by the way. Just get people thinking about leadership in a different way, so that you go back to your own organizations and start talking about, having that conversation with your leadership team, but also looking in the mirror and saying, what am I doing to evolve to a higher level of consciousness? To me, the dialogue is the start, right? And I think if we can start that dialogue, then we're gonna, it doesn't mean, by the way, of course, we're gonna hit that silver bullet, everyone's gonna transform into better leaders, but it's the stepping stone, it's the first step.
Well, we thank you, Mr. Merchant, for this interesting perspective and advice on how to lead organizations at this challenging time.